Welcome. In part one, we looked at India amidst the global power rivalry as to how it's trying to maintain its strategic autonomy by walking the diplomatic tightrope walk. We also looked at China as the new superpower on the block, trying to rewrite the rules of international engagement, which is pivoting the West towards India. In part two, we're going to look at India in the neighborhood as to how India's neighborhood first policy is working out on the ground. We will also look at India's aspiration to become Vishwa Mitra, a friend of the world.
More than 20% of the world lives in South Asia, making it the most densely populated geographical region in the world. This area includes countries like Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, which are all part of a group called the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, or SAARC. While there may not be a distinct South Asian identity among these countries, they have very close historical, cultural, linguistic, religious, and economic connections with India. There is also immense heterogeneity in the South Asian region, starting with the population and economic strength. It is often described as a region without regionalism. India dominates the South Asian region in size, economic and political clout, making it an Indo-centric region. Here, both India and China are competing for influence. The Modi government has been very active in this region with its neighborhood first policy. In this segment, we have asked our experts on the success of this policy vis-à-vis China. We also cover the volatile, uncertain, and complex region of Middle East or West Asia and see whether Mr. Modi's so-called hug diplomacy has worked wonders.
When Mr. Modi started as Prime Minister 10 years ago, it actually started on a very positive note because he took oath in the presence of all the SAARC leaders, including Mr. Nawaz Sharif, at the oath-taking ceremony. So 10 years on, how do you assess the neighborhood first policy of the Modi government?
The Modi government has used the Pakistan issue as a means of propelling itself into power. It is not interested really in establishing normal relations with Pakistan. And I'd say that it's not just Modi's fault, it's also the way that Pakistan has behaved. And so what is needed is for good sense to prevail. I think on the Pakistani side, it'll come sooner than on the Indian side because the Pakistani side is getting weaker by the day. The new government now in place has, it's gone back to the IMF. And the only thing that they expect is that they'll get a better deal this time than the previous one. But that dependence is going to stay. And given that dependence, there's only so much that the army can do.
Now, Afghanistan has played a critical role in the relationship between Pakistan and the USA, mediated by Taliban. India has built close economic and cultural relationship with Afghanistan, despite the meddling by Pakistan. Now, how do you see the dynamics between Pakistan and India with Afghanistan in the middle?
Well, clearly, Afghanistan has long been a battlefield for India-Pakistan competition. I mean, they sought to carve out influence and clout in Afghanistan for many years, and it's played out in very different ways, for sure. And Afghanistan, unfortunately, is caught in the middle of this. And this is a common trend, I would argue, in South Asia that power politics tends to drag in some very vulnerable countries that would much rather not get caught up in that. And it's interesting that after the Taliban came back to power in 2021, many expected that Pakistan would become very influential and dominant even as an external player in Afghanistan because of its long-standing relationship with the Taliban. Things have not worked out that way, of course. And I think that it's sort of one of these very striking truisms right now, sort of looking at how things have played out in Afghanistan several years after the Taliban takeover and U.S. withdrawal. India is actually on the front foot in Afghanistan. In Taliban-led Afghanistan, India's on the front foot, Pakistan's on the back foot, right? Pakistan is experiencing deep tensions with the Taliban over border issues, over terrorism issues. India has quietly, partially reopened its embassy. It's engaging to some degree with the Taliban. The Taliban has called for good relations with India. And I think it just goes to show that sometimes it's hard to predict how things are going to turn out. But I would argue that India has really played the Afghanistan issue very well, very effectively. And again, go back to this issue of strategic autonomy, right? India has no reason to close itself off from the Taliban. It doesn't have a good reason to formally recognize the Taliban regime, but it has that flexibility to engage with the Taliban in ways that can help serve its interests.
You talked about the neighborhood first policy, but the challenge there is that China is going after the same countries like Pakistan, Maldives, Nepal, Sri Lanka. It's challenging us in our own neighborhood. How would you manage that kind of situation?
But why should we take this as challenging us? I mean, each country uses its external relationships in the best way it can to serve its own interests, be it a Bangladesh, be it a Sri Lanka. Of course, they will engage with other countries, as will Nepal. Quietly, without anyone taking too much notice, hydropower projects between India and Nepal are moving forward. This is something that had not happened for ever since independence, right up to about 6-8 years ago. So, because Nepal has come to realize that at the end of the day, that those power projects can generate value for Nepal, give financial resources, earnings to Nepal, which will help in the development of their country, and their only market available is India. Take Bhutan. We don't talk very much about Bhutan, but something like 2,000 megawatts of power are now being generated between India and Bhutan through Bhutanese projects. And Bhutan is now prospering through this. Nepal has obviously come to realize that this is worth doing. Similarly, the cooperation between Bangladesh, Bhutan, and India and Nepal, BBIN as they call it, is also moving forward very well. Here is an example of transnational, sub-regional groups which quietly work to the benefit of the people who live in the region. And this is a remarkable success story of the past 6, 8, 10 years, which gets very little attention. That's all right, as long as it changes the way in which our relationship with our smaller neighbors functions. Maldives, we have some problems there, but we can manage these problems. I mean, Maldives, we must also try and look at the world from the perspective of Maldives. They don't want to be dominated by one single power. So they will balance our relationship with them, with other powers. This is normal. Sri Lanka, we don't question the fact that Sri Lanka engages with China, but it also depends on India. India is the nearest, closest large market. So the economic relationship is of great value. Let's work on this. Let's make this as mutually productive as we can.
Prime Minister Manmohan Singh never made a bilateral visit to Nepal. He went there for a SAARC thing, but never made any bilateral visit. Look how many bilateral visits Prime Minister Modi has made to Nepal. Similarly, in the case of Sri Lanka, so many visits have been made both ways. In terms of connectivity with Nepal, we've taken major steps to make Nepalese feel more secure with the oil pipeline and railway connectivity and everything else. With Bangladesh, it's been a huge success. unprecedented success in terms of neighborhood policy, where at one time Bangladesh won't even talk about transit. And today, look at the kind of transit connectivities that are taking place and the power sharing and everything else. Even with Nepal, we've agreed just now that we'll buy 10,000 megawatts of power from Nepal. With Sri Lanka, we were extremely generous to bail them out when they needed money, and they recognized that. And with Maldives, as I said, we were on a very good wicket till Moizu, pushed by Islamist lobbies, has muddied the ties, but I think they'll come back to their senses. So I think in terms of neighborhood policy, which actually goes beyond, just these subcontinental neighbors, we should also think in terms of Seychelles, Mauritius, West Asia, which is a part of our extended neighborhood. And there has been huge success in terms of reaching out to them and building very, very strong relationship with these countries.
I think we need to proactively reach out to all our neighboring countries as we have been doing. And possibly, you do something, but there's always the possibility of doing more. So maybe you need to do more. Just to give you an example, when India started our own vaccination program, if I remember correctly, it was on the 16th of January 2021. Within 4 days, on the 20th of January 2021, we had supplied millions of vaccine doses to our neighboring countries, whether it was Bangladesh, or it was Nepal, or it was Bhutan. Sri Lanka, I think, came a little later because they were getting their approvals and all that. It went to Maldives, it went to Afghanistan, etc. The point I'm making is that, many of these projects, for instance, $8 billion worth of loans and grants, concessional loans, financing to Bangladesh. It really is, today it determines a golden period of relations between India and Bangladesh. You referred to the neighborhood first policy. I think if you were to look at, Mohan, the relations as they existed in 2014 with all of these countries, I think you will find that the relationship is much stronger, more robust, and much greater confidence.
No, I'm very supportive of Prime Minister Modi's neighborhood first policy. I think India needed to strengthen its relations with its neighborhood. And India has shown over the last decade in particular that India has been generous. For example, when Sri Lanka faced an economic emergency, India was in fact the only country which came forward with nearly $4 billion in economic assistance to Sri Lanka. India has also been generous with Bangladesh and, of course, the smaller Indian Ocean states. So, neighborhood first policy has sent a very clear signal that India wants to maintain good relations with its neighbors. And remember, there is a huge difference in terms of size and scale between India and its neighborhood. India is by far the biggest country in terms of population, in terms of economy, in terms of its military. So it's always going to be difficult for India to convince its smaller neighbors that India means well, that there is no need to fear India, that there is no need to worry about India, that India is here to help you. These countries are always going to be apprehensive about India's growing power because they will see the asymmetry between India and their own position in the international system. And no amount of persuasion, no amount of economic assistance or loans is going to persuade these countries, India's neighbors, to essentially lock in their fate with India. It's going to be difficult.
As far as Maldives is concerned, I mean, also not only Maldives, but Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal. There's a tug of war going on between China and India. The big state versus small state comes into play, just as China's small Southeast and East Asian neighbors look to the US to countervail China. India's small neighbors look to China to countervail India. That is the big state versus small state syndrome that comes into play. So this is a harsh reality that India has to accept, that China will be a force to contend with in India's neighborhood. China will never let India dominate, establish its Monroe Doctrine, enjoy supremacy in the South Asian Indian Ocean region. So China's footprint, economic and military footprint, is going to increase, and these small states are going to play ball with India. There'll be times when they pay respect to India's interests. There'll be times, depending upon domestic politics, where they completely disregard, as Maldives is doing, and play ball with China. So this is going to continue, but India is doing the same with respect to China in Southeast Asia and in East Asia. For example, South Korea, Taiwan, Mongolia, Vietnam. These are countries that Japan, India is supporting as a counter move to China's geopolitical moves in South Asia. So this is a tug of war. This is a cold war between China and India that would not only shape the geopolitics of Asia, but also shape the U.S.-China global war, U.S.-China global competition, I should say. The U.S.-China Cold War at the global level. The regional India-China Cold War would shape the U.S.-China Cold War at the global level.
The Modi magic of hug diplomacy has somehow ensured closer relations with Israel and the Middle Eastern countries such as Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Iran at the same time. How has he managed to do that, and will it last?
Well, you're talking about the hug diplomacy. Unique gestures and warm hugs comes quickly, as we know, to Prime Minister Modi, who has embraced world leaders when he meets them on special occasions, etc. But this hug diplomacy signifies India's change in foreign policy. First of all, the idea is that we are friends of everybody. We are friends of everyone. We are embracing you all. And this is also part of the Hindu philosophy. And I think that we look at this new India. I think this new India is very much bold, not scared to break the protocols. And, the protocols of the West, we're shaking hands. Now we're willing to give you hugs. We're doing it in the Eastern style. And hugs policy, we definitely know Haj's contribution, but it has to do with other factors. Modi's success when it's come to his foreign policy, it's the fact that related to India's economic potential, its geostrategic importance to this new world order that is emerging, and of course the Indian culture. These together, I believe, form a unique place for India that no other countries with, I would say, no more money or the same aspiration will be able to deliver the exact results that India could bring to the world.
I think it's thanks to a policy that is older than that of the Modi government, but the Modi government has taken full advantage of that. See, for a long time, we took the position that we can't do anything with Israel because the Arab countries will object. But that's not the reality. The reality is that Arab countries have always understood that Israel is a reality. They engage with Israel in their own ways, in their own fashion. But there are all kinds of conversations that take place. So when it comes to ourselves, let's find a practical way of working with everyone. And again, this is an area in which this particular government has invested effort in building good relations with a whole number of countries in West Asia. And this is excellent. This is really the very stuff of diplomacy. Emirates is a classic example, but so are Qatar, Oman, and all the others, and Saudi Arabia. Very, very important player. So we have to deal with them, engage with them.
Under Mr. Modi, India has done pretty well in forging broader and deeper relationship with the Middle Eastern countries. The UAE has even built a Hindu temple and conferred on Mr. Modi the highest civilian award. He has managed to achieve this despite forging very close relationship with Israel. Considering the image that he has as the Hindu nationalist leader, how has this been achieved?
Oh, actually, the Saudis or the Qataris or the UAEs, they don't have any visceral relationship or feeling with Hinduism. They see it as something far away. How Indian Muslims and Hindus relate with each other is very different. So, what you said is absolutely true. I could add to that Saudi Arabia had given a very high award to Mr. Modi as well. For them, it is a matter of power politics. They have effectively divorced their religious preferences. And in fact, we do see that within Saudi Arabia, there's a major change that has come, and that if MBS could get his way, he would downplay religion even further. Now that's a sign of progress within Saudi Arabia. It does not necessarily extend to all Arab countries, but Saudi Arabia is extraordinarily important. And I should say, however, that the impact of what has happened in Saudi Arabia is not being fully felt in Pakistan as yet, but it will come in slow degrees.
In this episode, we started by sharing survey results from both India and globally, highlighting widespread approval of the Modi government's foreign policy successes. As we wrap up, we consult with our experts to examine if India's global standing has truly improved, particularly in its quest to become a Vishwa Mitra, a friend of the world. Acknowledging that such objectives are always a work in progress, our experts weigh in on how far India has come in achieving this aim of becoming a Vishwa Mitra. They also explore the impact of Mr. Modi's leadership on India's growing global footprints on the world stage. One of the narratives of the Modi government in terms of its achievements in the last 10 years is that we are fast becoming the Vishwa Guru or the Vishwa Mitra, the friend of the world. And that's bolstered by achievements in terms of climate accord and vaccine diplomacy, and also the champion of the global south. So considering those claims, how do you finally assess the record of the Modi government in terms of foreign policy?
And India really has become a critical global player. I'm not sure if I would describe it as a world power in a literal sense, but this is a country that has really reached a point where everywhere, every region in the world views India as a critical player, and India has really expanded its engagement throughout the world, especially in the developing world, but also with the West. And I think here one has to give credit to Manmohan Singh for taking India's relationships with Western countries forward, and especially with the United States. Let's not forget that Manmohan Singh staked his political survival on a single agreement with the United States, a civil nuclear deal. He won, so to speak. So I think I give credit to Manmohan Singh for really expanding India's role in the world, but I think that it's the Modi administration that has really ramped up that effort and done it with more rigor, with more panache, so to speak, and with more intensity in ways that I think have really been noticed, largely for positive reasons, by countries around the world.
Well, these are slogans. Let's not get hung up on slogans or get maybe too fascinated by our own description of ourselves. Does the world accept us as a friend? Yes. Quietly, we have run some excellent programs for tens of years now, for the last 50 years and more. The ITEC program, the Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program. Tens of thousands of people from other countries have come to India for training. Indian experts have gone to these countries, conducted training programs. Now, educational institutions are setting up campuses in Africa. That's the way to go. That's the way to work with other partners. Same thing is happening in West Asia. So, are we a good friend to other countries? Let's not go around boasting too much about it. Let's wait for others to tell us how they perceive India. But we have several basic strengths that we sometimes perhaps tend to overlook, at least in our internal dialogue. One of them is we have no inhibitions over transfer of technology. We are a country that has learned from others, benefited from technical and scientific and economic cooperation with a range of foreign partners, and we can now engage with others and offer them our experience. We have the experience of a country that has undergone economic development, and in many ways, I would say the Indian experience is more relevant than the experience of a country which runs a completely different kind of economic and political system like China. But that's China's problem. Let's not get too worked up on that.
Now, we took the initiative at G20 to organize the Voice of the Global South Summit. And actually, if you look at the G20 agenda, the leaders' declaration, all the concerns and expectations of the Global South are inscribed in that. It is not a G7 agenda. It is a developing country agenda. It's a Global South agenda.
Prime Minister Modi hugged you. Can you explain the moment, what you felt that time?
J'ai ressenti, c'est tout juste que j'ai pas pleuré. C'était une vive émotion parce que c'est un combat qu'on a mené.
So to that extent, there's recognition, and that vaccine Maitri that you spoke about has earned us tremendous goodwill amongst the countries who felt neglected and endangered by the pandemic and not getting support from anywhere. And India, with its 1.3 billion population at that time, was willing to provide them vaccines.
When I heard the expression of vaccine diplomacy, I wouldn't call it that. I think it was just extending the hand of humanity. I think there are other countries involved in vaccine diplomacy, not India.
And now this global public infrastructure and everything else has become very attractive to developing countries. This whole direct benefit schemes and Aadhaar and everything else. So India has now a lot to offer.
I know India is very keen to promote that idea, and I'm very familiar with the way it's trying to position itself as the champion of the Global South. Now, the Global South is such a big concept. What I can say is this: the Indian model of success has been thought-provoking and has been seen as a model for growth by many other countries worldwide, especially in emerging markets.
I think the stars have aligned for India. India now has a seat at the table. And India is taking us on board. India is investing in humanity. When India is successful, they give you the tools also to be successful. I want India to know that the rest of the Global South is with you for that journey.
And in that way, there is a lot of much to be learned from India. But at the same time, right now, when we see the governance in domestic governance in India, and we see the Modi government not really seeing diversity as strength, but trying to have a more narrowly defined definition of what it means to be Indian. That is concerning to the world. And that takes away from a lot of what India has achieved to date.
No, it's seeing India as part of the power complex, and so part of the G8, part of those countries that are important now in terms of the size of their GNP, their population. But in terms of giving a moral example to the world, no, I don't think so.
We want closer ties. And India is the first responder when it comes to any natural disaster in South Asia. Who do these countries turn to when there is a natural disaster, when there's a cyclone, when there is a tsunami, or when there's an earthquake? India is the first country to respond. So, India is the neighbor, and India does have a natural advantage over China or any other country. But we also have to be mindful that self-respect is important to any state and to the people of any state. As long as we are mindful of that, I think India should continue to be generous, and India will continue to have bigger influence in these countries than China.
We're talking about the, Vishwa Mitra, but you need to remember that Rishi, Vishwa Mitra, was not a Brahma by birth, but a brave warrior first. And if we're talking about India's perspective, if India wants to be a true friend, not just friends of everybody, but a true friend with a value to the relationship, India must become the warrior before. And in a world of a multiple geopolitical instability, as we see today, right now, with the war in Ukraine and war in Gaza, India, I believe, can become a ray of hope to the world.
There is no doubt, finally, that people have had a very positive impression of the Modi government as far as the foreign policy record is concerned. People are feeling proud that India's standing has been elevated. If you were to decode the secret behind this success, is it Modi as a person? Is it the team that he has been able to assemble, whether it is Jai Shankar or Doval and so on, or is it the vast experience that he has got? Where do you pin it?
I think it is basically, I would put it to the leadership. If all these things, Jaishankar had been there, Mr. Doval had been there, all of them had been there. If that leadership and that vision was not there, you would not really have been able to tap into what they are able to do. Meaning, if Mr. Doval suggests that, after Pulwama, let's do a Balakot. If the leadership is not there, like it wasn't there in 2008, when the Mumbai attacks took place, and you had, huge numbers of your forces in readiness, but then you didn't have the gumption to sort of, make them move. While here it was that you take a decision and then you leave it to the professionals to do how they would like to, but of course, keep a very close watch, a very close eye on that. So I would say leadership counts for a great deal.
What has really happened is that India has begun to loom very large on the international landscape as a result of its economic rise, its talent, human talent, its very strong leadership. The Greek Prime Minister the other day, when he spoke at Raisina, talked about the visionary leadership of Modi. And this is something which other world leaders also acknowledge. They've got very good personal rapport with Prime Minister Modi. Look at the way Putin phrases him, that under him, India will never succumb to pressure. And he's lauded India for pursuing its national interests and independence of its foreign policy. United States says that Biden says that it's a defining relationship for the 21st century. He's repeated that. So the leaders of two adversarial countries are all praising Modi. Now, he has a vision for India. He's looking at the long term. And he's already said that by 2047, we will be a developed country.
मेरा अखंड अतुष्ट एक निष्ठ विश्वास है कि 2047 में जब देश आजादी के 100 साल मनाएगा, मेरा देश विकसित भारत बन के रहेगा.
And he started attacking some of the basic problems that India faced, not at the elite level, at the business level, but at the level of the ordinary citizen. And all the schemes that are there about Swachh Bharat and building toilets and insurance and health schemes and bringing electricity to the villages, bringing even 5G now to every corner of India, and this digitalizing the economy, and then trying to make ourselves self-reliant with Atmanirbharta, not only in manufacturing, non-defense manufacturing, but even in defense manufacturing. All this has he's put India on the map as never before.
3, 2, 1, 0.
Here we have a majestic liftoff of LVM-3 M4 rocket carrying India's prestigious Chandrayaan-3 spacecraft.
India has done it. It has become now the 4th country to land a spacecraft on the moon after the US and China and the former Soviet Union. Just moments ago, we're talking just a couple of minutes, the Chandrayaan-3 spacecraft landed on the lunar South Pole. Look at the celebration here.
Yeah, so the South Pole's big, Victor, because of ice. There's ice there, so the interest with ice is that it can be possibly made into drinking water to support crews that would go there, astronauts that would go there, and also could be turned into rocket fuel to use the moon as a place to launch to further locations out in the cosmos. So that is the great interest with the South Pole, and no one's been able to land there yet. This is the first time a country has pulled that one off.
Yeah, good for India. They should
Great
celebrate
for
this.
India, yeah.
Great
really.
for India.
Hope you enjoyed episode 1. In the subsequent episodes, Shweta and I look forward to delving deeper into the key themes introduced in this episode with insightful comments from our panel of experts. As we continue our exploration of these crucial themes, we invite you to join us on this enlightening journey. Together, let's unravel the complexities of global affairs. Remember to like and subscribe for updates on upcoming episodes and exclusive interviews with our global thought leaders.